Hello, my name is Andrew Jensen, and I would like to start off with this video saying that I apologize for my appearance. I am incredibly sick, and if I cough throughout this presentation, it may just be because there was not a version where I did not cough and could no longer edit it from it. So any criticism that comes for this video, please refrain from sickness-related things, like if I start sneezing or have to take a break to clear my throat. I apologize. I'm really sick, so without further ado, let us begin. So my assignment, I am reviewing the journal article, A Nuclear World Transformed. I thought it was very interesting and definitely paints a good picture of what the nuclear world that we live in is like. So it starts off talking about the bilateral nuclear order between the USSR and the United States during the Cold War. So after World War II ended, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and this entered the world into the nuclear age. Now, Russia and the United States began an arms race in nuclear weapons, which instituted a policy of mutually assured destruction, which basically insisted that if one side opened up a nuclear arsenal and engaged another country with nuclear weapons, that country would then engage the former country with nuclear weapons, ending both countries. And so because of this mutually assured destruction, there was a hostile peace. So over the years, between different presidents and premiers, there was different nuclear agreements that were made that helped settle some of the hostilities that the United States and the USSR had. And there was an era of optimism after the collapse of the USSR, believing that we had finally exited from this potential apocalypse that could enter upon our world. However, there was some signs that a new order would begin, one that with even more fraught and danger than the previous one. So that began with the destruction of the bilateral nuclear order. So China became a huge player on the world stage and began developing its own nuclear arsenal. Now, China's nuclear arsenals are not nearly to the levels that the United States and Russia have, but they still pose a threat in the world, even though the nuclear weapons are seen as more of a deterrence force, preventing other countries from using nuclear weapons on them. Russia began emerging as a potential threat in the world, especially in recent years, with some of the annexations, like Crimea, some of the incursions into eastern Ukraine. And the world began embarking on a new trilateral order, where the preeminent power, the United States, is seeking to find balance between the powers of Russia and China. So there was a reset in relations between with the U.S. and Russia, and they began to rethink some of the previous agreements that they had agreed to. There were certain nuclear options that were finally put back on the table. Certain treaties were strapped, allowing different rockets to be launched from greater distances. And the US and Russia began realizing that any kind of agreement that they have between each other do not include China. And so this caused them to rethink some of their agreements and insist that for the sake of their own countries, it was in their best interest to begin walking back some of these previously agreed upon agreements. So with these nuclear fears beginning to redevelop between the United States and Russia, they began realizing that China was a threat to both of them, and they were a threat to each other. So this is beginning to enter into the trilateral order that we're currently in now, with the United States, Russia, and China. One of the big threats that we have in the world is the emergence of regional nuclear subsystems. So currently, there are about 9 states that control nuclear weapons, and there was very few of them before the 1990s, and regional powers and rivals are starting to develop, and larger nuclear stockpiles and delivering systems are being developed in countries like India and Pakistan, who have humongous disagreements with each other that have led to many conflicts throughout the years, as well as Israel, believed to have nuclear weapons. Although they have not admitted it, it's pretty clear that they probably have at least a decent amount, and with Iran beginning to research into nuclear options, it becomes clear that there could be a nuclear mutually assured destruction situation going on in the Middle East in the same way there is between Pakistan and India. At the same time, bad actors like North Korea are beginning to develop and test nuclear weapons. Now, it is not believed they have very many. However, in Northeast Asia, there is a situation where you have the United States via Japan and South Korea, and then China, Russia, all colliding. And North Korea is kind of seen as an intercept between the quote-unquote Western powers and the Eastern powers. Now, North Korea presents a bit of a conundrum because anything that we used to deter North Korea may also be seen as a deterrence or threat against China, such as the THAAD radar, which is designed to have an early warning system against potential North Korean attacks. But the Chinese also are able to be picked up with this THAAD radar, and the Chinese see this as a threat to their own defenses. So the new nuclear balance is beginning to bring regional powers into play that previously were not seen as that big of players on the world stage. North Korea, if they didn't have nuclear weapons, would probably not be in the situation that it is today, if it even existed as a country. But they had the incentive to continue to research nuclear weapons and to continue to display them to the world as a deterrence against the United States, South Korea, and Japan, and even China. Now, nuclear terrorism is beginning to climb to the higher levels of worries within the United States, and after 9/11, it began to be clear that the United States was able to be threatened by complex and sophisticated attacks made by small groups in foreign countries. There was fears that once the USSR collapsed, that nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction would leave previous Soviet states and enter into countries that were less agreeable to the United States than even the USSR, but that lacked the weapons in order to deliver potential blows to the United States, or even the sanity to prevent them from doing so. So, for the last 20 years, this has made nuclear terrorism one of the chief motivators behind U.S. foreign policy, and this led to the invasion of Iraq and a large rationale for the war on terror, believing that if we have U.S. troops in foreign countries, we can prevent attacks at home by beating back and focusing their attention on other countries. Now, there also is evolving technology that raises new concerns. So, improving technology has significant impact on nuclear relations and stability. So, with the improvement of conventional weapons, you have seen certain countries be able to prevent and or find out more information about nuclear stockpiles and develop systems for preventing attacks, or allowing us to make more precise attacks to disable their nuclear systems. And this makes nuclear weapons less usable, but at the same time also sparks their usefulness in the immediate, because if you believe that your weapons are going to not be able to be used in the next 20 years, it makes sense to use them sooner rather than later. So this has also opened up new avenues of competition. So with cyber, for instance, you've seen countries, presumably Israel, hack into certain facilities within Iran, for example, and this has opened up competition and allowed Israel to gain preeminence as well as intelligence on the Iranians. And it would be naive of us to think that the United States was not doing this to other countries, as well as other countries doing this to the United States. The military environment is becoming more structured, less structured and more intricate, making it difficult to make decisions in the way that they used to be made. The chain of command is now slightly more discombobulated. Considering all the changes that are taking place, new considerations have to be thought of before engaging in any action. And the nuclear order is now different than what existed in the Cold War, with many more different states engaging in this chess of nuclear warfare. So the implications. So the world is becoming more trilateral rather than bilateral. And I personally think it's even more than just trilateral. I think you can see different countries like England and France beginning to play a bigger role in the future, as well as they begin to make plays in Africa, potentially. And regional players within different countries are starting to play a bigger role, like Israel, Pakistan, and India. And nuclear terrorism is looming larger than it ever has during the Cold War. And it seems like we're more due for some kind of catastrophe involving nuclear weapons than we were in the past. And because of this technology that's constantly changing and innovating, it's forcing changes to the world order, which may spark fears and make people more reliant on force to enact their will. The United States now has more powers to contend with and focus its strategy of deterrence. While this is true, it also means that other countries have the advantage, in some instances, on attacking a larger power. If you have small groups of, for instance, cyber units, you can deploy them and have them start infiltrating the U.S. systems, and it makes the United States more reliant on conventional means if they cannot win in the cyberspace, for instance. And nuclear relations are now cascading, not only multilateral. So you can see situations like if India unleashed a nuclear attack on Pakistan, that would probably lead China to attack India in defense of Pakistan, which then could prompt the United States to attack China and North Korea, which would then lead the Russians to enact a counterattack on the Americans, South Koreans, and Japanese. So you can see these cascading events that could take place, whereas in the past, it was maybe only one or two countries that would be affected. There are now multiple levels of instability, and nuclear arms are much less controlled due to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, what remains necessary is for us to find a safe path into the next potentially tumultuous age of nuclear relations. I am hopeful that the future is still optimistic, and that we will see less violence because of nuclear weapons and nuclear power, and all the benefits that nuclear brings to the world. However, there still could be issues in the future, and it would be naive of us to not assume that these could have potentially devastating issues for the United States, its allies, and the world at large. Thank you. And here is the source for the presentation I just read from.